Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, hello and welcome to episode 2 of Inside the Stage Door. Today I'm fortunate enough to have actor and playwright Jimmy Lyons with us. Jimmy, firstly, welcome to Inside the Stage Door.
Thank you, James.
It's good to have you here. Where are you originally from?
I'm originally from Houston, Texas. That's where I was born and raised. But then I went to uni at a place called Georgetown University in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And then worked in New York City for a while, for a few years, and then lived in L.A. for 15 years before moving here in 2016.
Jimmy, how long have you been a writer for?
I guess professionally, so to speak, maybe about 14 years, but
okay.
Really most of my life. I'm 43, so I'd say, I've been writing since I was about 7.
And they say that you should write from what you know. Is that where you get all of your material from?
I agree. As you write more and more, I think you can branch out of that what you know. And I think when people say write about what you know, they often mean they're referring to your sphere of experience. So,
yeah.
But I think as you write more and more, that what you know it's more from a character perspective and an emotional perspective. So as you get older, you can write about anything. You can write about, the FBI in the 1950s. You can write about, someone who works in finance, and what you're really writing about is that's sort of those emotional underpinnings that drive the character. You can always research and find out, different things about the existence surrounding world. But ultimately, you should write about what you know as a human being and the experience of being a human being, if that makes sense.
Right. Absolutely, yeah. You must have a good ear for dialogue. Do you approach writing? Do you get dialogue first, or do you have a character first?
It's a great question. For me personally, dialogue is the easiest part. I've met and been around a lot of different people, and so those people stick in my head. So character for me always comes first, and through that is the dialogue. Now, I wish it were different. I wish I was a bit more structure driven. I think that's a more efficient way to work. It's to really understand every detail of the character and the plot before really putting the words down. Because as you know, like working on films and TV in particular, you can go to you can go to set and they might change the dialogue on the day. They might have the actor completely improvise the dialogue and not a word of what you wrote on the page ends up in the final cut. Yeah. Now, playwriting is obviously a bit different. Playwriting, you really kind of lock that in. But even in playwriting, you get to rehearsals. If you're there as the writer, the dialogue will change. Yeah, it does start with character and dialogue for me because that's the easiest. But I try to force myself to go to the deeper character elements first and then to plot.
As a writer, you were talking about actors changing text on set, and it might be something completely different to what you've written. Are you precious about your words?
If it's for the stage, I think it varies. It depends on where we would be in the process. If we're getting pretty close to, opening or previews, I think I'd be reluctant to change any dialogue because it's just at some point you want to lock it in.
Yeah.
But if it's in the earlier stages of rehearsal, I'm not precious at all. It's Elia Kazan, the great director, writer. I mean, he had a saying that was the director has an idea, the writer has an idea, and the actor has an idea, and together they make art. So yeah. I'm of the opinion that that collaboration will ultimately elevate the work, but you have to have some limitations in there. Now, there are other writers too, particularly with TV and film, who really just sort of loosely outline scenes. Like you take a Judd Apatow, for example, they have some scripted lines, but then they build into their production to have to allow these actors to improvise completely, like on the day.
Yeah. Is it? I believe that's how Mike Leigh works. Is that right?
Mike Leigh is, yeah. In fact, Mike Leigh he really has the actors do a lot of the due diligence in terms of the development of the character. He will have a sketch, an idea of the character, and really have the actors build out the life of those characters and then set up scenarios. Larry David famously does it with Curb Your Enthusiasm. So he will hire an actor, say he hires you for an episode of Curb, and you're doing a scene with him, and he'll just tell you what the outline of the scene is, and he'll say, I need you at some point to say this, this, and this. That's it. So he knows the story points. You may have no idea where it's going to lead, but they just improvise the scene, and you just have to drop a few kernels, a few seeds that will be paid off. But for me, no, I'm not precious unless it's like for the stage and we're getting close to the opening. Otherwise, I want to hear your opinion.
Yeah. Speaking of the stage, Jimmy, you had a big success this year with The King at Holden Street.
I'd say overall the reaction was positive. There were some people who came out of it not fully understanding that it was a satire.
Right.
So a group of NIDA students came to see it on the last day.
Right.
And were incredibly triggered by the whole thing. They triggered to such a degree that I think they had turned off, so to speak, by the second act, not realizing that I was completely satirizing and making fun of old school masculinity.
Yeah.
This toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
So, but in order to satirize something, you have to reveal it first. You have to reveal the behavior you're satirizing.
Absolutely.
And when you're satirizing, you want to sort of goose it a little bit. You want to, you exaggerate it to a degree. But in seeing that exaggerated toxic masculinity in the first scene, it's, for lack of a better word, it seemed to offend them. And then I actually sent an email to, it was one of the, I think it was the teacher, the teacher had really enjoyed it, but found some of it problematic. And then I wrote a long email explaining to him. But I think that's part of, there's a generational divide.
Right.
I think that a lot of the younger generation is quick to go to outrage.
Right.
And
right.
I get it. There's plenty to be outraged about.
Yeah.
And you see some bad man up there, espousing some old school toxic masculinity, tropes. You're going to be like, screw this guy. This guy can't, I hate him. Well, you know what? Right. You should hate him. He's the antagonist.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I don't begrudge anyone the reaction to anything I write. Like, everyone has a complete right to like, be indifferent about or hate.
That leads me to wonder, Jimmy, if theatre should be a safe place for an audience member, or should it be a place where we're challenged intellectually, spiritually, emotionally?
I actually think that's a really important question. And safe is a complicated word. Safe in that you have your safety things. You don't want to be throwing something into the audience, those sort of basic safety things. So you want the audience to feel physically safe, like nothing's going to happen to them in that regard. And I also think there are writers out there who, and I know a couple of them, who they write something and the purpose of their writing is to offend. And I don't agree with that.
Right.
Because you're not telling a story. If the story is offensive in some ways, that's fine. But if your intention is to offend, then I don't understand the point, because you're just pissing people off, and they're going to turn off, and they're not going to listen. And, they would say, well, at least that's an emotion. At least that's a reaction. Well, no, it's not. It's not, to me, theater, it's a form of communication. And when that happens, the communication stops.
Right.
Now, admittedly, in that story I just told you, it happened there. These students, they saw it, and a number of them just turned off. And then the communication ceased. And that's what happens when things become offensive.
Yeah.
So it should be safe in certain regards, but safe not in terms of the purpose of theater going back into history was to be used as a mirror, sort of reflecting all the things in culture and society and civilization that were messed up, that were suppressing. And that's why, even it was never meant to be for the rich and the high class. In fact, like back in Victorian days, the rich would have to dress up as peasants to go see theater.
Wow.
Theater was supposed to be subversive.
Yes.
It still should be. And that was the reason why when you look at any sort of dictatorial regime that came in, the artists and the writers and the actors, those people were, typically the people who were rounded up, slaughtered, or imprisoned first, because they had the power through their writing, through their stories, to really make people think. But it's on an Inception-like level. It's the planting of an idea. It's a grassroots way of thinking. So, no, I think, especially in today's day and age, when I can turn on Netflix over here and I can watch a ton of great content, you're going to compel somebody to leave their home and go sit in a chair and watch something on a stage, then I think it should be about something. And it should maybe make you stir in your seat a little bit.
Yeah, well, you hope as a performer that you're going to touch somebody in the audience and that they will have some connection. And I think 9 times out of 10 that does happen. At the risk of offending people who are watching, can we hear some of The King, Jimmy?
Sure. Any part in particular that you're...
I love the salesman's monologue.
Toward the end of the first scene, the salesman is he's emasculating Roger. He's using emasculation as a tactic to get him to buy this really expensive barbecue that he really can't afford. So the salesman's name is Hank, and we'll call him the Mark, the guy, the husband who's potentially buying the girl. His name is Roger. And Hank says, I'm not a salesman, Roger, and gurus are just eunuchs with shitty advice. I've opened the curtain, Roger. Do you want to take a look? I told you what I see. Roger, what do you see? Hank, something that used to be a man, was born a man, then told he should be ashamed for having a cock and balls and wanting to be the master of his domain. Then he starts to believe these things, believe we're all supposed to feel equal, believe he is the root of all evil, believe he is the problem. So he amputates his manhood because he thinks that's the answer. So women will like him. But now he's confused and angry because women still don't like him. They don't trust him. And he can't understand why, because he did what they asked. He stopped being a man. And now he hates himself because he feels like a mark, like he's been duped. Now he can't even walk into a store and buy a grill with his own fucking money. So he just stands there like some gelatinous Ken doll, talking about his feelings and making excuses for being the neutered jester in his own kingdom.
Bravo. There's a lovely mix of extraordinary comedy and tragic pathos with what you've just read out, and I think a good writer should have that. I just want to ask, are the arts important to society, and if so, why?
I don't think they're important. I think they're essential. Storytelling it's fundamental to who we are as people. If you take away storytelling, and in particular visual storytelling that we've been doing since we were, cave women and men, you're eroding at the fabric of human nature. Also fundamental to human beings is community. And those two things are combined, particularly if we're talking about theater, live theater, those two things are inextricable. You have community gathering together to watch a story. When you take those things away, then the fabric of a culture, the strong fabric of a culture starts to erode away.
Right.
And people start to segregate. Experiencing something, a story in some form, in person with your fellow community, it's going to be around now. It's going to be around 100 years from now. It's going to be around 1,000 years from now.
Yeah, it's putting yourself in other people's shoes and experiencing the human condition, isn't it?
Well, you have to. It's like you can't just experience the human condition through your own experience.
No.
Because it's such a limited way. That's why people read books. That's why people watch movies. They watch TV shows. They go see plays. Now, seeing stuff live is more confronting. It's why oftentimes if you talk to people and you ask them, what's the most impactful thing you've ever seen? Oftentimes they're going to say it's something they saw live. Because it's happening in real time. There's a real-time communication going on. You can't pause it.
Yeah, right.
You're kind of glued to your seat. And It's for a lot of people, it's transformative experiences that have changed the trajectory of their lives.
Absolutely. Just moving on, I believe you lived with Jonathan Nolan for a while in California, is that right?
Yeah, it's who I lived with when I first moved out.
Did you know at the time he was sort of getting Westworld together and storyboarding Westworld?
Oh
Um,
no, and that was the. Oh, he had always been interested in the book, but when I moved out, it was in 2002. He and his brother had just released Memento,
yeah,
and um, he when I moved, he at the time was working on a movie called The Prestige,
yeah,
and he was in the full throes of writing that when I moved out. But I know it was something that he had always been chewing on and thinking about and figuring out how he was going to write it. It was a Michael Crichton book, I believe it is,
right.
Westworld. So I don't want to speak for him, but I do remember with Jonah, it was, a passion for him that he was had been thinking about for ages. And the guy has such an expansive mind; it's insane. Maybe the smartest human being I've ever known.
That's amazing. Wow. Well, his writing's fantastic.
Yeah.
Um,
But he created it with his wife, Lisa. So who is also one of the smartest people I've ever known.
yeah,
So yeah, Lisa's a Stanford grad, a Harvard law grad. So you know that show is enormously complicated in its structure, and that's why it requires two giant brains like theirs to be able to just even conceive of it,
yeah,
much
right.
less execute it.
Did you ever collaborate with him?
I've lost touch with them, but we did some stuff we went to Georgetown together. So there was a couple things we collaborated there. I went off in my own direction. So after I'd moved there, I was living with Jonah, another friend of ours, Jordan. But my sensibilities were always completely different. He gravitated towards these grand, sweeping, world-building stories, and I gravitated towards really simple stories about complex characters.
Yeah,
Um, and that's where my sensibilities and my passion for storytelling lies. I You have to be true to yourself when it comes to that. It's I've tried the world building type of stuff.
yeah.
It's an organ rejection. It just doesn't work for me. But I mean, look, he came to anything that I did, like particularly for the stage, he loved to come and see because
Yeah, right.
although when he came and saw a play that I wrote called Alter Ego in LA, he said he had PTSD after he watched it.
Fantastic. Speaking of LA and theatre, you spent some time at the Beverly Hills Playhouse, working. I assume you worked with people like Alan Barton. Did was Milton Katsalis one of your acting teachers there?
Yeah, so Milton and I was a teacher of mine there for a few years. So, but yeah, I worked with Milton right until he died in 2008. So he was my teacher there for a while. He was declining there in 2008, but he was incredible. He had this volatile personality, like a lot of people from that era. So, Elia Kazan was one of his mentors,
Yeah.
as was Josh Logan. And he directed Al Pacino and Night of the Iguana, the Tennessee Williams play, and
Wow.
he did Butterflies Are Free with Goldie Hawn. So he did but his real passion was teaching. But yeah, he did have this really volatile, interesting personality.
Yeah.
But if he liked you, he took to you. He could be really kind and warm, and caring. But he definitely softened a little bit as he was getting older.
Right. Jimmy, you were also in a successful production of Enterprise recently at the Fringe. Who was that with?
That was with Joanne Hartstone, Anton Shrama, and David Daradan, all three local South Australian actors. It was written by a guy named Brian Parks, who's from New York City, and co-directed by Tom Kitney, who also did the production design,
Right.
which in itself was its own sort of accomplishment.
And what was your character?
I played a guy named Weaver, so a bit of a self-obsessed, narcissistic sociopath. I don't know if it reminds you of anyone who might be in power in the United States. So it was like Donald Trump meets George Bush.
Yeah.
That's sort of narcissism, but with George W. Bush's cadence is, sort of talking like this kind of.
It was an extraordinary volley of words all night long, and just the ideas and the wordplay. It left you exhausted as an audience member, but an enjoyable exhaustion.
It's exhausting to perform because that show is the writer said it's not a play, it's a stunt.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's ostensibly a collection of skits that form a story.
Right.
So, and each scene in some scenes last 10 seconds. So I think it's 52 scenes in 60 minutes.
That's amazing. Wow.
And every scene ends with a sort of punchline. And within every scene are other hidden little jokes. It's a bullet train. It runs really fast, and it was actually somewhat polarizing. Like, most people really enjoyed it. Some people were like, if you're never able to sort of get on board the train, it just sort of flies by you the whole time.
Right.
And I get it. Like, yeah, I had friends who saw it and were like, I just was never able to catch up.
Yeah, it's clearly written for the Netflix audience, but in the theater, it was really, really clever script, and well done.
Thank you.
Are you working on anything at the moment?
Yeah, a couple things. I'm working on something about my overall experience moving here, and called Rattleade, I've titled it. And it's inspired by, there was a Netflix series called Dairy Girls.
Very good series.
Love it. One of my favorites. I think it's a masterpiece. And so it's inspired by that, and then sort of taking that tone and structure and basing it on my experience, loosely basing it on my experience here. And then I've been working on something for years. So much has changed since we started working on it, but it's a piece about the FBI. I've been working with, I have a longtime writing partner, so we've been writing this piece for a long time. We pitched it and had some interest, and then Donald Trump was elected, and I can't go into it, but it just sort of messed up the story when he was elected. Our play went from something that was supposed to be a satire that now seemed more realistic.
Oh, no.
So then we just took it, and now we've actually moved it back in time to the 60s, and based it on a report that came out in the 70s when the FBI was investigating itself on its own corruption. So there's that, and those are the two main things I'm working on right now.
Great. They sound fascinating. Can't wait to read and see them. Jimmy, thank you so much. You've been a pleasure, as always.
Thanks, man.
I've been James from Reading Companions Australia. I'd like to thank Ipskip Productions, All Pro Audio, Tempo for Two Productions, and Tepai Films. Thanks for watching. Please like and share our page, and we'll see you very soon for the next episode.